First things first, my name is Peter Novosel. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO of SmartSuite. And today we're going to talk a little bit about automations and everything API. Unlike most webinars, I want to make this one as conversational as possible and go where the questions go. So feel free to interrupt me, raise your hand, enter questions in chat, and I'll ask Emma and Brian to help me out with question management if we have a whole bunch. But just want to make sure that we address the things that you're most interested in. So I think what we'll do is just start off with a general introduction to the way that you can interact with SmartSuite data other than the SmartSuite UI. There are a number of different ways that you can do that, and we'll talk about automations. I also want to give you an introduction to Zapier, and Make.com is actually brand new. I'm going to show you our pre-release beta, but it should be publicly available here pretty quickly. We have it in the Make submission process. They require review, just like all of these sites do, to publish in their app catalog, but that should be available here shortly. And then finally, we'll touch on the SmartSuite API. I'm going to show you a handy tool called Postman that allows you to interact with the API. And then we'll actually look at a little bit of simple code that uses that API to interact programmatically. So that's the general overview. Why don't we dive into that? And please bring up any questions as we go. And then we can go where the questions take us. I'm happy to answer questions about any of these resources. And I'm also going to point out some documentation and things that are available that give you additional details on the API and how to use it. All right. So why don't we start? We'll start simply here and just go into an app that I was creating while we were kind of getting ready for the webinar. Let's start out by taking a look at automations, because automations allow you to stay right within the product and interact with data based on things that happen within your records. And here I've created probably the simplest one that you can, where we're going to look for records that are created in App 1. No conditions. I can place any number of conditions that I want on this just by clicking Add. You can select the field that you want to monitor and say, maybe I only want status when it's equal to some value. Do note that you can pick data that's coming in from the triggering record, or you can pick a static value. In this case, I'm just going to get rid of that filter. And then we're essentially just going to go copy the record into App 2, prepending copy. It's another thing to note here is that you can freeform type into many of the fields, as well as accessing information that's coming in, again, from the trigger. A couple of things to keep in mind here. We're actually in the process of adding a number of additional things to this process, where we're adding a search function that you'll see here shortly, where you can iterate over records directly within an automation and take an action on those records. So if you wanted to update records in bulk, you'll be able to do that here shortly. We'll also take a look at how you can currently do that in Zapier and very shortly in Make.com. One thing to note is that you have an on-off status for your automations as well. I can turn it on, I can turn it off. If I haven't turned a new one on, it's going to prompt me when I actually save the automation to enable it. So when we're back in our record, let's just we'll create a new one. And we'll see over here in App 2, we'll get a copy of that record here in just a few seconds after it gets processed. You can see the one that I did a little earlier, created this copy of my hello world, which is right there. I'm still waiting. While we're waiting on that automation to run, let's actually take a look at the same thing in Zapier. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Zapier, but Zapier is a third-party service that allows you to interact basically through the APIs of a variety of different products. They support, I think, a couple thousand different platforms, and SmartSuite is one of those. Let's do this from scratch. We'll create what they call a Zap. You can search for SmartSuite, and I have a few Zaps that were configured with an older version of our plugin. We update things all the time. Whenever you're creating one, I encourage you to pick the one that says latest if you have several. And then if we're going to use SmartSuite as the triggering event, you can select whether or not you want just new records or if you want updated records. Let's just replicate the same one that we had in place. We'll say create record. And the first time you do this, you're going to have to configure. Of course, my Zoom toolbar is right in the way. You have to connect your account. And it may not be immediately obvious how to do this, so let me walk you through it real quick. It's actually pretty easy. You need two things. You need an API key and you need a workspace ID. Let's do the workspace ID first, because that lives right up here. You can tell your workspace ID because it's the first set of characters that directly follow the app.smartsuite.com in the URL. You can just copy that. And if I can find my window, just pull it back up. Put our workspace ID here. And then we need to go back and get our API key. The API key is available here. If you're an admin, the API key shows up as a menu item. If you're a general user, it does not. But if you click on any other preference in your profile menu and scroll down to API key, there it is. I'm going to copy that. And then we'll go back. Hopefully, again, trying to find my window. Here we are. We'll hit continue. And now I've got my 19th authorization to Zapier. We'll continue. And the first thing that it's going to do is ask you to select which solution you want to interact with, and then which app. In this case, let's set it up just like our automation. And one of the nice things that they provide is a test function. We can go here and test our trigger, and it's going to go query the system and find a record. And here's our Hello Webinar Crew record. This is really handy because what it allows you to do is map that information with actual data when you're selecting which fields you want to work with in the action. In this case, I'll also use SmartSuite as an action type. But again, you can search in Make, and they have many things available to interact with. Gmail, MailChimp, whole bunch of stuff, as well as some internal Zapier provided things like webhooks. And we can talk about that more if anyone's interested. Here you have to choose what you want to do. Do I want to go create a record? We do have find capability, and this is new, or relatively new. Some of you may not know that this has been added. We have two different types of finds available. One is just find a single record, or you can find many records. And if you do that, you actually get them returned as line items. And that's a special thing. It's list in Zapier, and then you can interact with them using other events that support lists, or as they call them, line items. In this case, we'll just create a record to replicate the one that we did in automations. And it's a similar process. You pick the solution. And you pick the app. And we'll target our second app. And then you map your fields. Now, some of them come back as required. Title is required. So I'm going to insert. We're basically just going to copy through, and it does have a nice search function. And the other thing that it does is it shows you the information, the data that you pulled in the sample record so that it's easier to map. So we can map field to field, put our description in. You can even do assigned twos, and it's even possible to do linked records. Now, status, because this is a selection list, you could either pull the value or we could just set it explicitly. Maybe I want to say that this is in process. Same with due date, priority. In this case, you don't have to map every field, and then you get the option to test. We'll test our new Zap. It was successful. It gives you a little bit of information, how long it took to run, and here's the actual information coming back from our API indicating that the record was created. So if we come over here, we should see if I pull back the latest data. Here we go. We've got our other copy, and then this one, in this case, I didn't prepend any text to it, so you can see in our action. So it came back with exactly the same title. Simple. Questions about Zapier or anything on automations that people want to cover? Emma, do we have any questions in those areas?
Yeah, a few questions. Is there an update on cross-solution automations being released?
Yes, we are in the process of doing that as part of that find that I was mentioning. We're implementing the ability to update things in other applications. We needed a way to basically specify what you want to go grab and update. So that's all part of that, which should come later in this month. We're in the test process right now, and we hope to get that updated and available very shortly.
Great. And then how good is SmartSuite with email templates, merging fields, and email automation capabilities?
Okay, let's dive back into the automations UI. You can essentially create, we don't have a template capability per se yet. Let's just get in here and take a look at what we do support right at the moment. Is we have the send an email action type, which generates a SmartSuite generated email. And it also allows you to specify the message that goes into the notifications panel. You keep in mind, I'll close out of this just briefly. Notifications in SmartSuite show up right here. And you can specify the text that you want to put there when the automation fires, as well as generate the email. And go back in here and create another one real quick. We also support sending, this is pretty new, Outlook, as well as Gmail. So you've got the ability to hook up either your Gmail or your Outlook account. It requires an OAuth to the external system. If you don't have any credentials, I can do this. It's going to pop open a window that asks me to authorize. If I connect my credentials to it, I'm then able to enable sending through this account. And you'll have the same options as you have when you're sending email here, which does allow you to specify a whole bunch of things. You can insert field values, you can do some formatting, basically the same option that our SmartDoc field has. You can also save one of these automations and name it something template and just copy that automation as a workaround to having the ability to specify an actual template. We are working on a feature. It's unrelated directly to automations, but just within the record conversation panel itself. And go show you what I'm talking about. if I open up one of these records and I open the conversation, we're working on the ability to actually reply or make a comment in email, as well as just through our own internal notification and commenting system. And they'll display here, and those will support templates. So we'll take that same capability and build it back into automations as well, but that's coming soon. That's one of the big features that we're currently in development on.
Peter, I have a question coming in. As far as running automations to move existing data, since there's no trigger because the data already, how would you use it from one platform to another? For example, click up to SmartSuite.
Okay, a couple of things there. Zapier offers for certain connections, they have this transfer capability, and transfers allow you to bulk load. So you configure the Zap, and then it gives you the option, if they support it for that particular system, to bulk load all of the existing records. Make does a similar thing. What we're working on, it is an enhancement just to our import capability, is the ability to synchronize with an external system. And we'd be curious to know which external technologies that enabled for, but we'll have things like Salesforce and other popular platforms where you're able to, when you're configuring your new solution, instead of saying that you just want to create it from a template or you want to create from scratch, you'll have the ability to say, I want this to be synchronized with, say, my contacts or opportunities that live over in Salesforce. And we'll have that ongoing synchronization available, that you can pick which fields you want to replicate. And I think that we're going to have, I'm not sure if the time for the synchronization timeframe is configurable just yet, but that will show up when you go to create new applications. You could work around that too, depending on what your particular scenario involves. Obviously, through the API, you can make calls, and we'll dig into that as well. We actually do some of that ourselves to get information and then deduplicate information that's coming in from some of the services that we work with, and then update the appropriate record in our own internal CRM.
Peter, is there a hard date or relative date for the Make integration release?
It's in Make's hands. We have version 1 of it submit for their approval. So as soon as Make pulls the trigger, they say it can take up to 2 weeks. I'm hopeful that sometime this coming week it's up and available. If someone wants to check it out earlier, send us a note and we can send you a link that basically invites you to the beta version.
Great. And then we have a question about the only way to create records from Gmail. Is this only available through Ply, or are there other options for this?
Other options from Gmail currently would be Make and Zapier, because they both support those platforms. So if you wanted to come in here and create a Zap that pulled from, say, Gmail, you can do that. And they give you a whole bunch of options. Make does as well, where you can get notified. In this case, I want to get notified about a new email. You have to configure, of course, your credentials for the email account. Then you tell it what mailbox you want to pull from. I want to pull from my inbox. And then again, it allows you to test the trigger, use that information, and then map it into, say, create record action. The other thing to keep in mind too is when you're creating either Zaps or Make scenarios, they offer a bunch of tools that allow you to filter things down. We're in the process of adding filters to our SmartSuite triggers as well, so that you don't need an additional step if you're coming out of SmartSuite. But in Zapier's case, they have the ability to come in here and say, hey, I only want to continue if this email has some particular characteristic. And you could say it matches, it contains some text, a variety of things to make it easier to filter down to just things that you want to pull in and take action on.
Are there any plans to allow for scripts to be run in automations?
Yes. Yep. And sorry to keep talking about things that aren't available yet, but it is a more exciting thing that's on our roadmap. We're intending to add an action type. If we go back in here into our automations, we're going to have an action type of script. We already have a JavaScript API that our own UI uses, and we're going to basically expose that scripting interface to allow you to interact with SmartSuite data. You could do things like query any of your applications, pull in record data, iterate over things, make updates. All of that should be possible. There will be some limitations just to make sure that these scripts don't get huge. We'll have some limits on the number of actions that each one can take and that sort of thing, but it'll give you a lot of flexibility to deal with scenarios where we don't have you need to make a complicated determination about what you want to go do. And
is this for fetching?
Go ahead.
Is this for fetching external sources?
You could use it to fetch external sources. You could make a REST call to another system, pull that data in, and incorporate it into the action that you take within that script step.
Okay, great. And then you have a question about an upload field. Is there a way to access this CDN to use automations both internally and externally through Zapier, and to move and use media files or documents?
With Zapier, we're adding the ability to do file uploads. It's not currently in the existing published Zap. We do on the API side, we have added an endpoint that allows for file upload. So if you're constructing an API app, you're now able to do that. It used to be a purely internal thing. We use a service called FileStack to manage the file uploads. So we published an endpoint that you can do a multi-part form push to.
You put that UI doing it.
I'm sorry?
Thanks, honey.
I suppose the question. Yeah, I suppose the question was using files that are in SmartSuite to send them through automation.
So Peter, it was my question also, go ahead and clarify. What I'm asking is, when having an upload field inside of SmartSuite and either uploading photos, videos, or documents, to be able to send them either through an automation to another platform using Zapier or Make, or even just sending it somewhere else in SmartSuite, currently the upload field doesn't have access to the content delivery network, so it can't send the actual files. Is there a plan to be able to have access to the file stack or CDN?
Yes. And now that we have it added to the API, we'll be able to add it as an action type as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we can talk about more specifics in that scenario when we get together and go over your stuff. I'd be curious to get more details about what you're trying to do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Peter, do we support webhooks? And if so, what events do you support for webhooks?
We do not currently have a publicly accessible webhook mechanism. We use them internally for a whole variety of things, updating the UI. But we're planning on exposing those programmatically through the API so that you could create a webhook that would send you a notification about some sort of SmartSuite event. It's actually something that is going to be required for us to do some integrations with other technology platforms. We're looking at things like Stacker and those types of things where they're creating portals, and we need to be able to notify those systems of events in SmartSuite. So that's definitely something that's on our roadmap. In the interim, both Zapier and Make support custom inbound and outbound webhooks that you can use for a whole variety of things. One example that I could show you, let's go over to Make for a minute. This is the Make UI. I'm going to go to a scenario that I already have configured. Go in here. And this is a copy of something that we're helping one of our partners with, where we're combining both a SmartSuite endpoint along with what's essentially a custom outbound webhook. It's their HTTP method, where you can specify what you want to send, in this case, a post, and then I'm using that to go retrieve some information that I'm going to iterate over. So this is really handy. on both of these platforms. You can specify custom inbound and outbound to work around some things until we have more direct support for it in SmartSuite itself.
Are we able to see a quick demo of the integration with Google Calendar, such as get the time, date, title, and invited guests and store in SmartSuite?
Google Calendar. Yeah, let's go do that. I'm going to get rid of this action. We have marked this one as beta, as we just released it. So I'm going to add this in. Right at the moment for Google Calendar, we just have create event. So I'm going to go create an event after I'm going to need to sign in. We're working on this as well. Google has this very interesting process where you actually have to go into production before they will approve your OAuth submission. This is important as well. You need to check the boxes here to give those permissions explicitly. I'm going to enable this. And now I can go fetch one of my calendars. And I have these fields available. I can give it a description. Give it a title. And we have attendees, start and end dates, whether or not to include a Google Meet link, and the location of the meeting. So that's what's currently available. We're going to be extending this to be able to receive those events and make updates to existing events, but this is the first one right out of the gate.
Peter, are you able to show us how we can create a record with linked records based on another record?
In automations?
Yes.
Sure, we could do that. Let's set up our app structure to be able to do that. And clean this up and get rid of a couple of these too. So the trick creating the linked record is updating the correct field. So here in app 1, let's add a linked record. We're going to link app 2. We can allow linking to multiples, that's fine. Okay, now we have our records available. So let's go change our create a copy. So anytime a record's created in app 1, I want to create a new record in app 2. But we're going to extend it to include the backside linked record field. And the trick to populating the relationship is including the title field from the triggering record in the linked record of the created record. Hope that makes sense. It seems a little convoluted, but essentially the title field is the identifier, and you're passing in that value to the linked record field, so it will resolve down to a record ID and get attached to the record. So that is the way you do it. And when you have that in place, you'll get the linked record populated as soon as that new record is created.
So the same goes for multiple linked records.
Yes, the same goes for multiple linked records. You can pass it a list of records and they'll all get linked. And see that copy test link just showed up. It's over here on the other side. we've got that record and its value was placed into the link.
Will this work if the title field is auto-created?
Aha, the Achilles heel. Yes, actually, what you're going to need to do is pass the record ID. The record ID is always available to you, and it's displayed when you do things in Zapier and in Make. Right now, it's not working. We actually have an open issue with the ability to place that record ID in as the value into the linked record field, but it should be resolved in the next day or two. I was running into that myself in this Make scenario where I'm iterating and I need to go attach a record that has an auto-generated field that's a duplicate. So yeah, that is an issue currently, but again, we should have that resolved here shortly. Good catch.
Okay, great. And then last quick question before people are wanting to get on to API. So the question is just, will this work if there is a duplicate title?
That's exactly what we were talking about is if you've got a duplicate title, it's basically it will still work, but it links the first one that it comes across. So basically the first record that was created, which may or may not be what you want. So that's why we want to be able to add our record ID. And you can even display the record ID if you add the field to your app. For obvious reasons, we don't show this by default because it's just this programmatic thing. It's a globally unique identifier so that we can guarantee that these numbers or these character values are unique. But yeah, that's what needs to happen to ensure that you get the proper record length.
Okay, great. Are we able to get into API? I think some people are excited about that.
Yeah, let's transition over. First thing that I want to point out about the API is that documentation is available right here from any solution. You can go click Solution API, and what it's going to do is open up a set of documentation that is specific to your apps. So you can see things like the app ID, you can see fields as well as the field ID. And the field IDs of the default fields are human readable, but when you add additional fields to the app, they are encoded. So you need to look up to know that, hey, this is the ID of my linked app to field. And then it gives you some sample values. If you scroll down in this list, it'll show and it'll give you a sample request, and you can actually copy and paste this into a curl command if you're using a Unix desktop or a Mac, and just perform that query. From there, let's go take a look at a tool that is commonly used to these things. This is a program called Postman, and some of you may be familiar with this if you do work on APIs, but what it allows you to do is specify what type of operation you want to take on a particular URL, and then set things like headers and the body parameters. In the case of SmartSuite, this is a unique thing. When you're retrieving records with the API, you're not making a GET request because we support some optional parameters in the body. So that's the reason why, and I get asked all the time, why is your retrieve record a post, not a GET? It's because you can do some interesting things in the body JSON to modify the results that are returned to you. So in this case, this query that I've got pre-configured here is calling our applications endpoint this particular application ID, which if we go back to our application, you can see that ID right here. So a little bit about the structure of our URLs. This value is the solution ID. The subsequent value is the application ID. And the third value is the report ID. So this grid view report has this ID. This is the value that you want when you're interacting with this particular app. And then in this case, if you just interacted with the application endpoint, you'd be making changes to the application structure itself. more on that here in just a few minutes. But in this case, I want to return a list of records. I could also replace this list with that record ID of a specific record and just return that record. In this case, I'm saying that I want all of them. You can also use some additional parameters to limit the number of records that are returned. And we give you a little bit of information about that. You can use a limit value to say that you want a particular number back, an offset value to say that I want to start my list at a particular number in that response stream. And then you can actually specify sort and filter criteria as well. If we go back to our Postman and send this request, it returns JSON. And so you can see our hello world record. And in this case, I just told it to give us everything back. It gives you the current offset, the total, whatever limit, and the time and date stamp as well. And you can see as we scroll through our results, a lot of these are just the default fields, but here I have that linked record field. Or actually, this is the one, is it returns an array. Okay.
Quick question really fast.
Absolutely.
Postman is only an API platform allowed for SmartSuite. Is that correct?
No, Postman's just a generic utility that allows you to interact with any REST API. In this case, it fits well because we have an API that conforms to REST standards. So it's easy to try out different API calls using Postman before you actually go and create a program that does it for you. That makes sense? Because
And then do you have Postman collections available for download?
we haven't put an official one. We've got an internal one, but that's a great idea. I'm actually going to take a note about that and see if we can get a Postman collection published. Great idea. Other questions here? Once you've looked at the API, you see exactly what it is you want to do, then you can actually go write some code. In this case, I've got a little bit of sample code here in Visual Studio, and I'm an old Microsoft guy, so this is C#, but you can use any programming language you want. There are plenty of examples if you're just getting started with API development and writing custom apps and scripts. There are plenty of tutorials online available to do this in Python, JavaScript, Node.js, whatever your language of choice is. There's a way to do it. In this case, this is just a little bit of C#. And just like in Postman, you need a similar list of things, right? There's our account ID. There's our app ID. I've got a little utility here that's returning me our token value. It's coming back here. I'm passing it in this call to my get record function. And in this case, C# has in their HE library a post async call. So this is an asynchronous function, and I'm taking all of those values, I'm formatting a URL and posting it to that URL, grabbing the content that comes back, which is a JSON string, and then parsing it. In this case, just because it's easier to work with in C#, I think I'm passing back a list of dynamic objects, so I can just call the values with dot notation instead of needing, if you return a J object, it's a little messier, I think, to read. But in this case, I'm just making a list of all of those records. I'm returning them. And then you take whatever action. Obviously, in this case, it's just a sample, so it's printing out to console what it's returning. In an actual real world scenario, you would be going to the database or whatever is appropriate for your particular use case. And here we can see we just made a call to that API. It returned 10 records, which most development environments will allow you to do this and step into the individual items that were returned. And if I let the program continue, we're going to see that it just basically pulled that record title value out of the JSON structure and just wrote it to console. Just about everything that you see in SmartSuite's UI can be done through the API. If they're in something to be aware of is that if you go to our help site and just put in a search for API, it's going to return a bunch of documents that give you additional information. One of the more interesting ones may be this one about the metadata API. And we've got a number of the endpoints documented that allow you to do things like list your solutions, return specific solutions, duplicate a solution even, list all of your apps, add fields to applications. And we're still working on some additional documentation around the JSON structures for creating all of the field types. But one hint, and when you're doing this type of development, something that makes it easy to see is if I go and open my console, oops, I can find where it is when everything's collapsed. If you open your developer console and look at the network traffic, you'll actually see the API calls that are being made. So if there's something that we haven't fully documented yet, you can generally get an idea of how to structure the JSON by just looking at the network traffic. Other questions here? There's obviously a ton of stuff to cover about the details of the API, but if anyone has some general questions or would like some additional information about one of the API endpoints, I'm happy to give you some more detail.
I've got a non-technical question, Peter.
Sure.
If there's a company that might be a good fit for SmartSuite and we wanted to recommend an integration through the APIs, is there a cost associated with that on their end, your end, or if it makes sense for your users in bulk, that's something that you guys figure out?
Each of the plan limits has a limit on the number of API calls that you can make by plan type, just as a safety valve on people doing just ridiculous things through the API. But generally, there's no additional cost to make API calls. And that's something that's important to note too. The way that security is done currently is your API token is associated with your user account. So it has exactly the same permissions that your user does. What we highly recommend, if you have a number of different or processes that are using the API, is to create a separate API user and give it just the permissions that it needs to do its job.
And if an API that would be beneficial for my business would be beneficial for SmartSuite as a whole, would that be looked at more as a partner and that would just be a relationship we pass off and then you guys decide whether that's useful or not? Like for example,
go ahead.
Just like some of the features that have come out between Google Calendar or Make or Zapier, those are integrations that are done at scale and you guys figure out the APIs and how that relationship works. I've got a couple companies that I'm talking to that I'm interested in merging APIs, but I think that those companies would be beneficial for all users on the platform. So instead of just figuring out for my own account and my own API, wondering if I could pass that relationship off and if it's beneficial for everyone, that could be something that you guys explore. And if there's a cost associated with that or how that works.
Yeah, if there's something that you think would be beneficial to the community at large, definitely pass it along. If you think that it's a partnership opportunity for us, send that information to Avi, just Avi at SmartSuite. He's our VP of partnerships. But from a technology standpoint, I'm happy to take a look at those types of things as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And definitely, if there's something that you want to see added, go make a feature request and make sure that you get all of your friends and colleagues to vote for it, because we really do look at all of that stuff and try to prioritize the things that the largest number of customers want to see added. Okay. Emma, other questions?
Yeah, so two questions. One, custom codes and integrations are not supported by SmartSuite.
I'm not sure that I understand the question. You can use our API in a custom program. We don't yet have the ability to run script inside of the automations engine, but we will soon. And both Zapier and Make offer a whole bunch of kind of logic operations, and you can run script in them. You can do a whole variety of things to accomplish your goal. Obviously, Zapier and Make both charge for their service. I might have a personal preference, but if you want to know more about that, just ping me privately. But that's the only additional cost associated would be if you're using a third-party platform like that. You're free to develop any kind of custom code and run it against the API. Again, to the limitations at the account level, just on the number of calls and the volume of those calls on a monthly basis.
Okay, and one last question here. Is SmartSuite a FedRAMP compliant to use for US federal government?
We've talked about some of these things in terms of HIPAA and FedRAMP and so forth. To be FedRAMP compliant, we would have to run an instance of SmartSuite in Amazon's FedRAMP service, which is possible. If that's something that you or a customer is interested in, definitely reach out to us and we'll have a sales and then technical discussion about that. Obviously, there's some costs associated with running things in that environment, but it is definitely possible. Anything else, Emma?
No, looks like they're all answered.
Okay.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Peter.
Absolutely. Please ping us if you have questions. I know that it's hard to just, until you've really spent some time in the API and get a feel for it, you don't know what the questions are yet. So definitely ping us an intercom, or you can always reach out to me and I'm happy to point you in the right direction. We're creating new and better documentation all the time as well. And we'll try to call everyone's attention to that in the community. If you haven't signed up for the community, please do. I would love to have some of these ongoing discussions in that forum, just so that we can share kind of tips and tricks and snippets of code and all of that kind of stuff. That would be a great place to do it. So I highly encourage you to do that. You can reach that environment right through the homepage link. If I can get logged back in here. On our homepage, just click right here and it'll take you to the community site. Thanks for spending an hour with me and learning about all the exciting things that you can do in and around SmartSuite without using necessarily the application UI directly. Lots is possible. We certainly can't cover it all in one session, but reach out when you do have questions and we'll help you through it. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.